You had a research note on a company you and I are both familiar. We actually went on a site visit together several years ago, Midas Gold. That note was extremely well written, articulate, factual as always, and provided a good baseline, best case, and dream scenario for the stock. You and I could not convince people to buy the stock at 30 and 35 cents. Here it is trading at $1.63. It's breached $2 earlier this month and looks poised to head higher. Despite that, you articulated a pretty compelling case about why Midas Gold is likely headed higher in the near to midterm.
You know, they published a pre-feasibility study in December 2014. They used 1325 or 1350 as a base case price. And the numbers they came up with, they weren't particularly great at 1350. And capex was almost $1 billion. And the worst thing was, since 2015, gold hasn't spent much time above 1300. Period. So the base case price was higher than the actual gold price. And so you kind of said, well, this thing's going nowhere. And the market has priced it at that. Then we had the permitting issue. I mean, it was 2 years ago when we were on the site and we were on this permitting process. By the end of last year, since getting serious in 2016, they had spent 53 million US on the permitting cycle out of 210 million total. And Stephen Quinn has told me that by the time they have their permit at the end of next year, knock on wood, they'll have spent $70 million on this permitting process. But the result will be a company ready to produce 350,000 ounces gold annually, plus what will become a very important antimony byproduct credit. And these numbers have had to be adjusted a bit. I'm now using 1.3 billion rather than $1 billion capex. And I run the old discounted cash flow model. And I presented a graphic in it, and it's on my website in the KRO summary report I published as a free thing. And at around $2,000, the stock is worth between $5 and $8. At the base case price, it's $1.81 to $3.37, but that's kind of sketchy because it doesn't quite hit the development hurdles of the NPV having to be bigger than capex, and yet it's still between $1.50 and $2. This market does not believe that this $1,900 to $2,100 gold price range is here to stay. It's still pricing a stock like Midas as if it will never get a permit, and gold will be back to $1,300-$1,400 in due course. And that's what's exciting. And the reason we saw a gap up from being as low as 26.5 cents during the March COVID market meltdown is people saw that, there's finally light at the end of the tunnel for this permitting process. Hopefully the draft EIS gets filed this month like promised, and then that sets in motion a much more defined timeline for getting an actual permit. And this stock is a better thing to watch with regard to sentiment because it will show you the degree that the market is taking seriously that $1,900, $2,000 is the new reality. And if you go crazy and put in $3,000 at a price, we're talking at a stock that would be worth $10 to $15 that is trading at a tenth of that today.
Fascinating. You mentioned antimony, a critical metal. You've been one of the analysts at the forefront of critical metals for over a decade and probably over two, if I'm not mistaken, John. We talked a bit about China and its push for domination. And frankly, we're starting to realize here in the U.S. and around the world that developing a critical metal supply chain is not something that you can do in a year or two. We'd be lucky to do it by the end of the decade if we get aggressive here in the U.S. You mentioned Midas for gold. How can people play the critical metal space? Is there a name or two that you like that provides exposure to maybe not just one metal, but maybe a couple in a jurisdiction that is in desperate need for what the company may have?
Well, the problem with critical metals, and that would be the rare earths. Rare earth prices are at even lower level than they were at in 2009 when Rare Earth Mania 1.0 kicked in. Rare Earth Mania 1.0 happened in a context of globalized trade, which China violated by increasing export quotas, by screwing with Japan over the Senkaku Island incident. And then all of a sudden, rare earth prices went up 10, 20-fold. And we saw a boom in the juniors, and there was a big scramble to try and build deposits, make mines and rare earth deposits outside of China. But eventually China realized how stupid that was, and it all ended. And prices are even lower today than they were back then. So all these projects, they're still out there. I mean, one of the ones that I had followed was Leading Edge Materials, which used to be called Tasman, which has the Nora Char project. It is a large, heavy, rare earth enriched deposit. It's the second biggest in the world, and is not in a horrible remote location like the biggest, Strange Lake, which was also one of the big performers from that period. These deposits are not really worth developing at the prices we have today. But today we have a context of deglobalization, and people are worried about the length of their supply chain. China dominates in rare earths and in metals like antimony, graphite, a few others, and they cheat by not enforcing their environmental regulations, by having these various rebates, tax rebates, things that favor domestic production. The purpose is to try and force downstream manufacturing into China. For example, permanent magnets that go into all kinds of applications, including electric vehicles. That's all made in China because there they have the rare earth supply right next door, and nobody has to worry about that supply being disrupted. But if we see this world start fragmenting into different trading economic units, then the rest of the world is going to have a problem, at least the ones not aligned with China. And so although there's no economic argument for developing these projects in places like the United States and Canada and Europe, there is a case to be made that if a rupture occurs and supply no longer comes from China, then we will have a problem missing key critical inputs to various components and that are manufactured around the world. And to go back to the antimony, that is a boring metal used in lead acid batteries and in as a flame retardant. It has applications for military stuff.
It's boring unless you don't like being on fire, right, John?
And in fact, the reason that this stibnite project in Idaho of Midas is such an environmental disaster was that during World War II, they mined the stibnite deposits there. And you may recall when we visited that project back in 2018, Stephen Quinn was saying, yeah, we have to do this water diversion tunnel so that the stream can go around the open pit. And we've designed it so that it's going to go right past this very high grade antimony vein, which we think has more antimony in a fairly concentrated place than in the entire 3 pits that we will eventually mine for gold with antimony as a byproduct. So here is this emergency storehouse of antimony, which if suddenly there's no antimony coming back from coming out from China because they're keeping it all for themselves or only their allies, the United States will be able to get more than enough that it needs for itself. It'll be able to supply its allies. And that's why a stock like Midas Gold is to me an absolute no-brainer, because you're not only betting on the world coming to an end with a higher gold price, and you're going to make good dough along the way, but the antimony will be part of what will hedge against other bad things happening in the way the world operates. And for companies that, if you want to hedge, companies like the Leading Edge Materials, which has a graphite deposit in Sweden and the Norra Char deposit in Sweden, although Norra Char and graphite really, Woxna can't really compete against the China price now, people are starting to think, how can the world be reorganized? And you've heard of this ESG concept right now, which normally is about sustainability, government, and environment, and so on. But it's now also including strategic supply chain consideration. And this old-fashioned, optimized textbook stuff is you make everything just in time, you cut costs to maximize profits. All of that's undergoing a rethink. And that's going to go into some of these critical metal companies. They're not really, they don't represent good economic value right now, but we're in the midst of a sea change which will create economic value for these companies.
And just to be clear, with rare earths, they may not make economic sense right now, but the contribution strategically that they make is what makes them critical, pun intended. Correct, John?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like your car is made entirely of a critical metal. They're called critical because they are a small input in the final product, but without that input, the product doesn't work very well. So that makes it critical. And it's a fairly broad space. The United States has 35 critical metals on its list. These are ones where the United States does not produce anything. They even have beryllium on the list. How can that be? The United States is the world's biggest producer of beryllium with the Spore Mountain project that Materion operates in Utah. But when you drill down deep enough from that bertrandite ore, you cannot recover the high purity beryllium needed by the military for its hyper-specialized applications. This is why they import the semi-precious beryl from places like Colombia, all these other parts of the world, and why it is on the critical metals list. And one of the companies that I cover, it's been involved in scandium, which is not critical because nobody actually uses it because there hasn't been sufficient supply for anybody to dare making it part of their aluminum alloy components. But these guys have figured out a way on how these copper oxide operations in the United States, of which there are about 12 of them, 6 of them owned by Freeport, how they can set up a unit on the raffinate waste that gets pumped back onto the pile and pull out all these bizarre metals that are in there that happen to get dissolved. The SXEW guys only recover the copper component, the rest gets lost. They've tried in the past to get this stuff out, but it's too complicated. It really takes a chemist to figure this out. But there's been some changes in available technology which makes this available. So these guys are right now trying to get a deal with a Freeport or anybody with a copper oxide operation to set this up and recover metals like cobalt, scandium, possibly beryllium, nickel even, and that they will be able to pull it out in a high purity form. I mean, cobalt right now, ESG. I mean, how do you, if you're going to be Tesla or somebody like that and have cobalt in your battery, can you truly say that this doesn't come from the Congo and those parts of the Congo where they use slave labor and that to mine this stuff and in any case wreck the environment? Well, what if you have a domestic source for your cobalt? I mean, Apple, for all its iPhones, say all our cobalt comes from these American oxide mines via this company, Scandium International Mining Corp, which is doing an ESG thing by recovering something on which energy is wasted dissolving, but that normally goes back into the dirt pile where it stays when all the copper has been sucked out of it. So this is kind of a feel-good thing. You're guaranteed that no bad conflict mineral thing has ever intersected with it. There's lots of opportunities like this emerging in this whole critical metal space that taps into the not just the geopolitical supply problem, because cobalt comes from Congo, which is not China, but in terms of how clean is this critical input to your product, which you're trying to market as something with a low carbon footprint and that doesn't have any environmental or human rights degradation in its tail.
John, we've chatted for half an hour. We could probably go another half hour and not even blink. You mentioned Midas. You mentioned leading edge materials. I think that's a good overview of what's going on in the space. We should absolutely do this again soon. Before I let you go, can you please provide people with how to get in touch with you and go to your site, because there's a wealth of research and information that can benefit anyone considering trying to make money in this space and due diligence. It's you do some top-notch research, and I think it'd be a service to people if they had the website. What's the link to that?
Gerardo, the website's kaiserresearch.com. It normally costs $450 US per year. I've now got a special, $275. It gives you everything to the end of this year. It's not as cheap on a per month basis as the annual membership, but the next 5 months are going to be the most lucrative part of this awakening bull market.
Well, make sure to put a link up. John, let's do this again soon. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you, Gerardo.